All right, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, awesome. Okay, so this month we are going to be going over all of our various and most commonly used addendums. Um, so starting with the addendum AC. Um, and next week Ashley's going to go over the addendum A. And the week after that, we're going to go over the addendum S and the R and the O. And then we're finishing off the month with just a compliance and command training. So that's just the tech piece that forms. So if anyone needs a refresher on that, feel free to join that month. Or that week. So yeah, again, the GMAR Addendum AC, which is that additional contingencies addendum that the GMAR created a few years ago now. So I've had the same training ever since they adopted it. Um, but it's kind of a little bit unnecessary to say, kind of like introduce this piece of it, but I do kind of like to talk about the history of it, just in the sense that it was created again a few years ago to just kind of like put uniform language to all of these like random provisional language that agents were using. So when the market got more competitive, a lot of people were adopting new strategies for their offers to stand out, right? And so it was just more so to address inconsistencies in language when people were putting these additional provisions in. So, and it was around three main things. So, the inspection contingency, the appraisal, and what's called the escalation clause. So, the way that you can kind of think of this as well is that you've got your standard contingencies, but then these are expanded upon to make them more seller friendly in a sense. Again, there was, some listings were receiving just like it, more than 20 offers, right? So a buyer really needed to stand out in terms of making their offer the most competitive, most attractive to the seller. So people were even doing things beyond these kind of standard three things. So, so again, it combines the inspection contingency threshold language, the appraisal gap language, and the escalation clause. And it was to provide consistency across the marketplace in terms of how the language read. Again, different brokerages were using different things. It is optional use. So, if you're not intending to, or there is no need, if you're not in competition, you don't necessarily need to employ this. I've had agents who have employed the Addendum AC even when they're not in competition. So you can still use these provisions if you want to. So um, kind of some warning signs. So or just warning language in terms of like how people have interpreted the um, expanded language. So, with contract language, none of this is perfect. There's still so much gray area. And just like, even in the standard contingencies, there is gray area. And with these expanded language, there is still gray area. So that's just not an avoidable issue. So just, that's more of a word of caution if people try to, you know, if people are reading things differently, that's just because we're human and that just might be the case. So, another warning in terms of the usage of these. So you'll want to consult with the buyer's other parties, their lenders, for example. So like if you're going to use the appraisal gap, we need to check with the lender to make sure that that buyer has the funds to cover an appraisal gap. And then just again, a reminder, transactions are always case by case. with this addendum AC, you might use all three of the expanded provisions, or you might use just one or two. So again, it's just a conversation with your buyer, what they're comfortable with, what the landscape is with the listing overall. I mean, are there 20 other offers? Are there 3 other offers? That's going to change how you use the addendum AC. And always, again, guys, stop me at any time with questions. And then just like to get into the tech piece of it, so it is in the global packets. It's right next to the GMAR Addendum A. So here's the GMAR Addendum A in your global packet, and then the AC is literally right next to it, and they look like the same document. If you hover, it will pop up for you so that you can read that this is the Addenda AC. All right. And then to start us off, so it's a 2-page document. This is the top, just the top section of it. This should look familiar to you. So you're going to fill it in as normal. This addendum is made part of the offer to purchase dated, and you'll put in the date made by the buyer. You'll put in the buyer's name. I always like to point this out. So this line is in all of our addendums, but it just again states the provisions preceded by an open box are part of this addendum if marked such as with an X. They are not part if marked NA or left blank. I just always like to use this opportunity to remind you guys that it's best practice to include the NA if you're not going to be using the provision. An open box, it could be, if this ever went anywhere after closing and, if a judge or somebody had to look at our contracts and they saw an open box, it could be up for debate on whether or not we actually presented that provision and went over that in a contract. So I think it's best practice to always, if you're not going to be putting in or including a contingency, to mark NA in the box. So always want to get on my little soapbox on that. Okay. All right. I'm actually going to go back to this slide. I thought I moved this, but I did not. I'm going to revisit the multiple counter proposal at the end of this, as it relates to the addendum or the escalation clause, excuse me. Yep. All of these did not leave. I'm so sorry. Hold on. I thought I moved all of these. We'll come back to it. Okay, so the inspection threshold. This is the first expanded language that the addendum AC addresses. I'm gonna put this back up. I'm gonna go through the language and then we'll talk about it in just more buyer-friendly terms. So, starting at line 8, so buyer agrees not to submit any notice of defects or amendment for repairs, replacement, credit, or price reduction under the inspection contingency in the offer unless the cumulative estimated cost to repair or replace the defects identified in the inspection exceeds blank, if the seller has the right to cure the defects. If the buyer delivers a notice of defects, seller's election to cure applies only to the balance of the items for which the cumulative cost to repair or replace exceeds the amount stated on line 10. So this is the threshold language. So in a sense, what the buyer is communicating to the seller is, I want an inspection contingency, but I'm going to let you know right off the bat, if the total cost for the repairs comes under a certain amount, so we'll say $5,000, then I, as the buyer, will not deliver you a notice of defects, and I won't even attempt to negotiate with you with an amendment. So we're going to have our inspection. I'm going to find out what's going on. If the repairs cost less than this $5,000, then I'm committing to moving forward, and I'm not going to serve a notice or deliver an amendment of any kind. If the estimates for the cost of repair or replacement, shall be obtained from an independent qualified professional selected by the buyer, and the seller agrees to provide access for the buyer and the buyer's qualified professionals to obtain such estimates, the buyer shall pay any costs associated with obtaining the estimates. So this is nice. So it states right in here, anytime we're going to be using this threshold amount, we need to get estimates for it. And they need to be provided by qualified professionals. And it's stating right in here, the seller is agreeing and allowing that buyer to allow the buyer and their qualified professionals to get in. And I love that it states right off the bat, the buyer shall pay any costs associated with obtaining those estimates. So there's no, it's black and white right there for the buyer, like this is on you in terms of costs. Parties may together agree on the cost to repair or replace the defects for the purposes of this provision. So like anything, it's still negotiable. The estimated obtained or agreed upon are utilized only for execution of this provision and do not affect any seller right to cure unless specifically agreed to in writing. Then on lines 20 and 25, there are two optional provisions that the buyer can include. So the seller may also obtain the estimates by an independent contractor and deliver to the buyer by the deadline for the inspection contingency if it's delivered before any notice is delivered. So Mr. Buyer is saying to the seller, go ahead and get your own estimates if you want as well. We don't just have to rely on mine. And the seller has to do that in a timely manner. They need to get those estimates done prior to the buyer serving a notice of defects. If the seller timely delivers such estimates and the estimates differ from the buyer's estimates for the same items, and it's again mapped out for us, the parties agree that they will average the different estimates for each affected item to arrive at the cost for the purposes of this provision. So, if we got two differing roof quotes, scope of work is similar, or the same, I should say. One is 7,000 and one is 10,000. Then we're going to land on 8,500 for, again, the purposes of the threshold. The next provision that we could add is either party may extend the original deadline for the inspection contingency by blank days. It defaults to 5 if that's left blank, to allow for follow-up inspections and or obtaining estimates. Either party may do this by delivering the written notice of extension. So this is kind of nice too. If this were checked and we're running on a time, let's say our inspection contingency is up on this Friday, and this were checked. We don't have all of the estimates in, contractors' schedules, we can't get them in there on time. The seller or the buyer could just unilaterally send a notice saying, I'm going to extend the inspection contingency by 5 days. So I don't know, I think that's kind of a cool tool to use for, again, to make it more attractive for the seller. Okay, now going back to how the threshold works. So this is laid out really nicely if we don't exceed that number, right? So if it's a $5,000 threshold, repairs come in at 4,500, we know we're just going to closing. If it exceeds this amount, however, that's when it's kind of just open up for and proceeding as if it's just a traditional inspection negotiation. So, once we exceed this $5,000 threshold amount, really the buyer, they have the ability to still continue to ask for whatever they want to ask for from the seller in terms of negotiating. They don't have to have that $5,000 threshold in mind. I think the spirit of the provision is that, that they would still be negotiating, in the sense that, okay, there's $10,000 worth of repairs that are needed, but I'm only going to ask for $5,000 because I had said that I would take on the first 5,000. That's not technically written here. So where we've kind of run into issues on this or kind of confusion is, you know, where does the buyer or how does the buyer apply that first threshold amount? And they don't technically, it doesn't have to be black and white that that first threshold amount is applied somewhere when you're negotiating via an amendment. So the where the threshold comes into play technically is if that um, threshold amount is exceeded. So again, we've got 5,000 in here and $10,000 in repairs are needed, and the buyer decides to serve a notice of defects with all of that $10,000 worth of repairs listed, and the seller elects to cure, then that $5,000 is applied, and they are committing to taking on that first $5,000. And that is um, stated here. Seller's election to cure applies only to the balance of the items for which the cumulative cost to repair or replace exceeds the amount stated on line 10. So that is where that is addressed. So again, this is more just to say, if we're exceeding that threshold amount, you're gonna just negotiate as normal. We're going to spell out and map out how repairs are addressed, whether it's the seller actually taking on the work themselves, whether it's a credit, whether it's a price drop, etc. Um, and again, if it gets down to that notice of defects, that's when we'll apply the credit. I'll say in practice, I think that people are typically using the threshold when making those considerations for how it's negotiated 100%. I just want it to be clear that it's not like a set in stone buyer has to take on that threshold amount when you're in that negotiating stage. Any questions? Okay. Um, I will say Charlie puts up the stats on kind of like the most commonly used like competitive strategies in terms of our offer writing. And it's still like 50-50 that inspections are being used. Um, I think of all of the tools, I think this is a really helpful one so that that buyer can still have peace of mind of having an inspection contingency while also giving peace of mind to the seller. Hey, I'm not here to nitpick, so yeah, I think it's nice. Um, and I've seen these dollar amounts really high, like $20,000. Like the buyer is saying to them, their chances are likely low that we'll be coming to you on anything because this threshold amount is so high. Okay, so that's the first one. This is just a repeat of what I have just said. Oh, I will say this. So line 9 uses cumulative and adds an S to the word defect. So therefore it can be used for one or more. So if one item is above the number on line 10, then a notice could be given. Or if you've got multiple items, let's say that $5,000 threshold amount, you've got 5 different things that cost $1,000, you can use the total of those repairs in terms of that threshold amount. And then I had this in here, so conversational way to discuss this. So this is coming from Corey Lamont, the WRA attorney. She actually drafted this, the addendum AC. So the language is intended to say that if the buyer includes $5,000 on line 10 and then provides a notice of defects for $10,000, the seller is only on the hook to cure $5,000. The buyer basically has said, I am good to cover 5,000, and anything above that, seller, I am saying I need you to cover. So again, just a repeat of what we have just said. Okay, so the appraisal gap language, this is the shortest of the three. Um, so again, you would check number 28 or line 28 if you're going to include this. Buyer represents that the buyer has consulted with the buyer's lender before including this provision. So it's stated right there for the buyer. Before we use this, before we employ this tactic, we need to make sure you actually have the funds to cover any gap. So this is, I don't know, like 3 or 4 or 5 years ago when our offers were going way over asking. This is when it was much more meaningful, when we didn't have data to support, we didn't have market data to support some of these offer prices. So at the time, it was like, okay, this is great that I've got this offer, $20,000, $30,000 over asking, but if it doesn't appraise, then it really is meaningless to me. A lot of people started adopting this appraisal gap, saying to the seller, I am going over asking, and if the appraised value comes in a certain amount, if it comes in lower than a certain amount, then I will, or that offer price, I will still commit to going through at the purchase price I had named already, the accepted offer price, and we'll go to closing. I will just cover the gap between the appraised value and the purchase price. So again, it was giving peace of mind to the seller right off the bat, that yes, you can feel comfortable accepting an offer with this purchase price, even though it's way over asking, because I'm going to cover the gap in any, if it is different. So the way, again, it reads, if the offer includes an appraisal contingency and the appraised value is less than the purchase price, the buyer agrees to cover the difference up to, and again, you're going to name, that amount. So we've seen anything from $5,000 to $10,000 to $20,000 that the buyer is committing to paying if that appraised value comes in lower than their accepted offer price. Buyer hereby represents the buyer has sufficient funds to cover the gap and the amount financed in the financing commitment contingency in the offer. Buyer is hereby prohibited from sending a notice objecting to the appraised value unless the appraised value is lower than the purchase price minus that appraisal gap. So if we have a $200,000 purchase price and a $10,000 appraisal gap, and the appraised value came in at 185, then the buyer could serve a notice at that point. But let's say that appraised value came in at 195, buyer is committing to moving forward at that $200,000 purchase price. So if the seller has the right to cure the appraisal contingency in the offer, the seller may satisfy the contingency by delivering written notice to the buyer, adjusting the purchase price to the value shown on the appraisal report, plus the appraisal gap. So let's say, using that example, if the buyer submits a notice objecting to the appraised value at 185 and they had a $10,000 purchase price, then the new price, if the seller elects to cure, is going to now become 195. So seller is saying, yeah, I will elect to cure this price, and because you had a $10,000 gap in there, we're going to take that 185 plus the 10,000, and the new price is that 195. So pretty straightforward. But I don't see this one, I don't think, used as much, to be honest. Now that we've got comps to support our purchase prices and our list prices, I should say, I feel like all of that has caught up, and the need for the appraisal gap is not as it was years ago. So, all right, any questions with that? Okay. Okay, so the escalation clause, this one, probably the most complicated. And we've added as you saw earlier, slides on how to perhaps respond to an escalation clause with a multiple counter, which I'll go over after we go over the escalation clause itself. But at the end of the day, multiple offers with multiple escalation clauses, we have found, instead of trying to navigate and math it out, and with the mere fact that there might be other terms that you want to counter, it might just be best not to even employ the escalation clause, but use, and this is coming from the seller's perspective, but to counter and respond with a multiple counter offer. So we'll talk about that more in length. But okay, so the escalation clause. So you would use this if in a competitive situation. And the buyer is committing to and communicating to the seller, here's my offer price. And if you receive another offer that beats my offer price, I am letting you know that I will beat that offer by an incremental amount up to a max number. So I'll go over the language in detail. So if seller accepts this offer and receives one or more additional bona fide offers to purchase the property with terms acceptable to the seller no later than blank. So you're going to put in a timestamp on this. So let's say I am submitting an offer today with an escalation clause. I might give the seller, you know what, you can receive offers through tomorrow, and my escalation clause will still count on any offer that you receive tomorrow. You might want to make it the same day. So if you receive any more offers today, then I will, and I am open to being bumped up. But let's say you receive an offer after this date, then this escalation clause no longer applies. So,
Steph,
yes,
question on that. Does that usually tie, or the date usually tied to like the binding acceptance date, or
it
is it
usually,
necessary?
I'm sorry, I cut you off, but
Oh,
yes,
no,
it's
good.
the binding acceptance date.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Um, yes. So which results in net proceeds of the sale, purchase price minus any monetary contributions by the seller, payable to the seller equal to or greater than the net proceeds of sale payable to the seller under this offer, then the purchase price of this offer shall automatically increase to an amount which generates net proceeds of sale to the seller. Then you're going to name your incremental amount here. So this could be $1,000, this could be $3,000, $500, in excess of the highest net proceeds of sale generated in such other offers. I'm going to continue on. The purchase price of this offer may be increased once or more than once. It would be in your buyer's best interest to hit more than once. And this is allowing for that incremental amount to be bumped multiple times until it reaches this max price. If nothing is checked, then it's going to default to once if neither is checked. Hold on, maybe increased. Oh, okay. It defaults to once if neither is checked. So again, from the buyer's perspective, you're gonna want to put more than once. You'll have the conversation with them. But if they're dedicated to paying up to this max price and they had an opportunity to use their incremental amount and bump it more than once, they're likely gonna want that opportunity.
Just to interject here, someone put it really easy to kind of explain to a buyer. It allows it to ping pong back and forth with another offer. So you go above the other offer if you check more than once.
Thank you. Yes, like those layman's terms. Ping pong. Yeah, that's a perfect way to say that. Um, okay, so then on line 44, you're going to identify the price that this buyer is willing to go up to. So let's say we've got a $200,000 offer price and we've got an incremental amount of $1,000 with a purchase price max of $215,000. So if another offer comes in for 207, then this offer could now become 208 up to that 215. If the purchase price, I'm on line 45 now, if the purchase price of this offer is increased based on one or more other offers, the seller shall no later than blank days, and it defaults to 2, after receipt of the said other offers, submits to buyer a signed amendment to the offer reflecting the adjusted purchase price and a copy of any other offers that resulted in and were the basis for the increase of the purchase price of this offer. The original purchase price remains the same if the seller does not provide the amendment. The seller or their attorney shall send the other offer to the buyer's email address at, and then we're going to put the buyer's email address right there. And then the buyer agrees to accept the amendment and deliver it back to the seller according to the delivery terms in the offer and by the deadline for acceptance in this amendment. I love this because, again, it's all mapped out. That was something that when there was a difference of opinion, when there was just multiple versions of the escalation clause out there floating around, this was not mapped out. So it's saying right in here, okay, if the offer is getting bumped, the seller will email a copy of the other offer to the buyer, and that's between the seller and the buyer only. Our license does not, or prevents us from being able to share confidential information, right? So that's why this communication has to happen between the seller and the buyer directly. And it's stating that the buyer on line 50 agrees to accept the amendment. So it's right there. That was something that we would run into where a buyer would receive an amendment to increase their purchase price and they just wouldn't sign it. And it was just like, what? You had already agreed to this. So, but it wasn't spelled out black and white, and now it is. So, so one question we get a lot too is, does the seller have to, so the seller's role is to deliver the other offer proving that it was bumped. And the seller's listing agent, the seller's agent, they do have the option of sending off the amendment as well. So if that piece of it does not have to come directly from the seller. The listing agent is free to send that amendment to the buyer's agent. It's just that the seller has to communicate or provide the other offer, giving the evidence that it did in fact get bumped. So, escalation clause, beware.
Can I ask a couple of questions about the dates? If you don't mind
Yes,
going back.
yes, please.
Do you mind going back one
Oh
slide?
yeah.
Just so, yeah, thank you. So let's just say the offers are in today and you have binding acceptance, and line 37 date would be no later than tomorrow end of day.
Okay.
So then where does the 2 days kick in on line 45? Like, does that mean that, you know what I mean? Like, because they would only have till tomorrow to really bump up the clauses, or they just had to show that they received the offers by tomorrow, and then 2 days beyond that to show the proof of that.
It would be 2 days beyond the accepted offer. So if a buyer, so if the offer gets accepted, so they're kind of independent of one another. So
Okay.
if the buyer sends an offer off today, their binding acceptance is through tomorrow, and another offer comes in tomorrow, and that is the quote unquote bumpable offer, meaning this offer is the one that's ultimately going to get accepted based off of the one that came in tomorrow. The seller would accept this offer, and we've now got an accepted offer. Now, within those 2 days, they are going to send the offer that came in, which
That
bumped,
caused the,
that
yep,
caused the bump. Within that 2-day period, the
got
seller
it.
has to send this offer to the buyer number one.
So they still have to send a binding acceptance, like agreeing to it, and the amendment showing the new price for us to sign in order
Yeah,
for it to be,
no, the amendment happens after the accepted offer.
okay,
So you don't, like, the seller doesn't have to provide evidence of the bumpable offer. That's how I'm gonna word that right now. The
yeah,
seller,
that's fine,
they don't have to, they don't have to send that prior to this offer getting accepted.
got it,
Like, they don't have to prove that ahead of time. So
okay.
you would accept it, and then the listing agent is communicating to the buyer's agent, yep, you did get bumped. So the seller is gonna email now
Within,
the other offer
okay,
and to show that they're gonna get bumped. And then I'm gonna send over an amendment with that price increased up to X.
and that would need to be signed or initialed within 2 days after receiving it. Or well,
Yes,
we'd have to have it received within 2 days and initial it, obviously.
yes.
Okay.
Signed. It won't be initialed, it'll be signed.
Oh, initial, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yep. So, okay, and we're gonna enter into like big time gray area right now. So I just wanna like prep you guys for that in terms of, so the net proceeds, so the escalation clause uses the net proceeds of sale payable to the seller to determine whether the escalation clause is triggered. So the net proceeds technically equals purchase price minus any monetary contributions by the seller. So monetary contributions include the seller payment of the compensation to the buyer's firm now. So we should be using that commission amount named on the last page when we are figuring out the net proceeds of sale. I'm going to say that, and I'm also going to say, I don't know that we've been practicing that. So that's why we kind of want to keep it pretty simple in terms of, yes, this is a consideration we need to be making. And I just don't know how often people are using the compensation number when figuring out the net proceeds, which also then leads us again back to just using a multiple counter offer and the why it's nice to just use that. And Ashley, I'm going to ask you if you have seen anything otherwise in terms of using that monetary contribution.
I have not in any of the helpline situations or anything that I've seen. And frankly, I don't know that most agents realize that it's written in there.
Yeah. I don't know that they are either. And I don't know that that changes anything either. So we're just going to leave it. I wish I could be more matter of fact about how. I just know that, like, generally speaking in the marketplace, I don't think that that consideration is being made. So,
I think it's just good to know that it's there so that if there is something that's super close and there's any discrepancy, you
yeah,
understand the possibility that this can occur.
yeah. Perfect. Okay. Again, bullet points that I think that I've already gone over, but so if choosing to exercise an escalation clause, the offer is simply accepted and evidence of the other offer is delivered to the buyer after the accepted offer. It's now clear that the seller side initiates the amendment to change the price. It's stated right in the provision that the buyer must deliver the amendment back by the deadline. And then just like a word of caution for buyer's agents and listing agents. So buyer's agents, I would call the listing agent before the submission of an offer that includes an escalation clause. I think it's not as much of a worry as it used to be, but there are listing agents out there who just don't like using escalation clauses. So, you know, it might behoove you to ask in your like, you know, in your prep calls to the listing agent, we're considering using this. Would your seller be open to using this? You know, another thing might be the seller might not want to use an escalation clause. They might just want the highest and best. So make sure that's part of your conversation when you're calling the listing agent ahead of time. As buyer's agents who are submitting an offer, that's part of our protocol. We need to be calling the listing agents to ask those questions. And you know, again, in the realm of establishing rapport with a listing agent, you always want to call them ahead of time. Listing agents too. So, you know, have conversations with your sellers about escalation clauses ahead of time. Like, you know, likely whether or not your property, whether or not your listing is going to be one that will generate multiple offers. So you just want to prep them for that possibility, and that you might be going over that provision. Again, it's more just like just setting the stage, right? Whether or not you're going to be using the escalation clause, it's just nice to set the stage for the possibility ahead of time. Okay, we included these examples of what it looks like when you have the ability to bump an offer more than once. I think I got this directly from a WRA attorney. So we've got offer number one, we've got offer number two. So in offer number one, we've got an initial price of $160,000 with an escalation of $10,000, and it can bump once up to a max price of $190,000. On offer number two, we've got an initial price of $167,500 with an escalation clause of $5,000 and can bump more than once with a max price of $185,000. So to analyze this, we've got offer number one, which turns into a potential purchase price of $177,500. So you're taking that $10,000 increment and adding it to the $167,500 of offer number two. So now offer number two is now at $177,500 technically, and you can add $5,000 to that I'm sorry. So offer number one is now turned into an offer price of $177,500. So offer number two could add $5,000 to that $177,500 because they said they could bump more than once for a final purchase price of $182,500. And that's because, again, that offer number two indicated that the offer may be bumped more than once. So that's a pretty simple simple example to show how it can ping pong.
It honestly, Steph, I think this is great because my initial understanding, I've obviously never used this before, was that it would bump the escalation would be off your original offer price. But seeing that it's actually then bumped off so like in my head, my first thought was like it'd go from 160 to 170 because it would jump up 10 grand.
Mm-hmm.
And going off of the initial offer from offer one, which is what the bump was, but seeing that it goes off of the second offer of 167,500 is helps to clarify that it bumps off the second offer, not off of your initial offer. If that makes sense.
Yep, that does make sense. It gets really confusing. I mean, I don't know. That's why I love the multiple counter offer, which we'll get into. Okay. Listing agents, more reminders. So listing agents should be extra vigilant when reviewing offers with an escalation clause. And this is coming from KW Legal Counsel and more WRA attorneys that have advised that in situations where sellers receive multiple offers with multiple escalation clauses, sellers are better served using a WB44 counteroffer or a WB46 multiple counteroffer. So you could pick one offer and just proceed with that one, counter what the price would be, and just pick one offer to continue to work with. Or if you want to put multiple counters out there to multiple buyers, that is a strategy as well. So the multiple counter can address other terms of the offer that the seller wishes to see different. And then the seller has the opportunity to choose from multiple offers with terms most favorable. So one thing that I would struggle with when kind of fielding questions on escalation clauses, and a lot of times that was the only provision that people were honing in on, versus like, okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean, just because there's an escalation clause, that doesn't necessarily mean that other terms are favorable to the seller. You might have another offer that doesn't have an escalation clause, but the seller likes those terms better. So, it's not like an automatic, the seller doesn't have to accept an offer with an escalation clause like right off of the bat. I mean, they might want to again see other things change. Maybe they want the closing date to be different. Maybe they want maybe there's another offer that didn't have an inspection contingency, and sellers want to see if the offer with the escalation clause would also accept an offer without an inspection contingency, so, or if the buyer would go for that. I guess my point is, it's like the escalation clause is not the end all be all, and there's other considerations where you might need to counter the seller anyway. So just don't lose sight of that, I guess, is my communication. So how to use the multiple counter offers. So, and again, this isn't, this isn't necessarily a tool that you would only use if there are multiple offers with escalation clauses. Like, you could use this with more straightforward offers too, and then you've got multiple offers. So it's just more reminders that this tool is out there for sellers to use, and can really clean up terms, clean up offers, and provide more clarity in terms of the purchase price as well. So you're going to use when there's more than one buyer, and it's unethical for an agent to use if they are not actually if there's not more than one offer in. So there's got to be the existence of multiple offers in order for you to use the multiple counter. In the case of accelerator clauses, it clarifies the purchase price and eliminates the need for proof of the other. And there are 3 parts to the multiple counter offer. And that's where I need to go back. Okay, so this is what the multiple counter offer looks like. So, starting at line 1, multiple counter is being made by the seller to one or more other prospective buyers. The terms of this multiple counter proposal may differ from the terms of multiple counter proposals being submitted to other prospective buyers. So no 2 multiple counter proposals may look alike. There could be different terms that the seller is countering. This multiple counter proposal is not binding on the seller or the buyer until the seller's binding acceptance per the lines 40 to 42. Seller or buyer may withdraw their multiple counter proposal or accepted multiple counter proposal at any time prior to the binding acceptance per lines 40 to 42. So starting at line 6, should look kind of similar. So the offer to purchase dated, gonna put the date there, signed by the buyer, and then the address on line 7 is rejected and the multiple counter proposal is made. All terms and conditions remain the same as stated in the offer, except the following. And this is where you're going to identify the changed terms. So this is going to look normal. So the purchase price is X. The closing date shall be this date. The inspection deadline may be, 10 days from acceptance versus 15 days that the buyer originally put in. So the seller is going to identify the terms that they want to counter, and you're going to lay them out between lines 10 through 18. The multiple counter proposal, I'm on line 20. The multiple counter proposal by the seller will expire and be null and void unless an approved copy, so this is a distinction here, the term approved versus accepted. So unless an approved copy is delivered to the seller in a manner authorized in the offer to purchase on or before blank. So you're going to identify the first date, meaning, okay, Mr. Buyer, here is the multiple counter offer. You need to approve it and send it back to me by May 19th. You're going to identify who drafted it and when. The seller is going to sign on line 25 and 26. Okay. So the buyer now has the option to approve those terms as they are, or they can counter the multiple counter if they want to. So you would use just a typical WB-44 to counter back. So the buyer might say, okay, so that purchase price is fine. The inspection deadline date change is fine, but I do want to change the closing date. So we're going to counter back and just change that closing date slightly. Another option, and this is kind of a for buyers agents too, you know, to counsel your buyers, I've seen people come back higher on purchase price to kind of make their offer stand out even more. So that might be a tool that you want to employ in competition. So the point is though, they can either approve what the seller has countered back to them, or they can counter terms again if they want. Okay. So approval by the buyer. So this multiple counter proposal by the seller is approved by the buyer. Approval of this multiple counter proposal is not binding on the buyer or the seller until the binding acceptance of this approved multiple counter proposal by the seller. So now there's a second date introduced here. So before the buyer had to approve it and send it back by May 19th, but we don't have an accepted offer yet. It's only accepted if the seller now accepts it and, excuse me, I'm going to go to the third page. The seller accepts it and delivers it back to the buyer now by this May 20th date. So in essence, what's happening is the seller could be collecting multiple approved multiple counter offers. So, you know, they've got 3 multiple counter offers out there and maybe all 3 buyers approved that. So now the seller has the pick of their litter in terms of what offer they ultimately want to go with now. And it's only binding if they send one accepted multiple counter back by this May 20th date. So again, buyers, you got to get us back this approved multiple counter by May 19th. Now I've got a whole day to figure out who I want to go with. And I'm going to pick number 2 and I'm going to accept that one and I'm going to send it back. And now now that's a full-fledged accepted offer. Again, kind of tying this back to the escalation clause. Again, it's just when there's multiple offers out there and maybe more than one of those offers has an escalation clause, and it's just, you know, it's difficult to see where the math could ultimately go to in terms of how it would bump. And again, with the idea that there could be other terms that the seller wants to counter anyway, you might just want to use that multiple counter and say, okay, here's what the purchase price is. It's clear to everybody. And it's just a clarifying tool to use. And it gives the seller the option to have multiple buyers like step up as well. Okay, I'm gonna stop share. It's kind of a long one to go through, so I appreciate your patience. 12:55. Okay, so we made it. Yeah, again, we've seen the GMAR Addendum AC still used. It's not used as often as it was because we just don't have the competitive nature that we had. You know, back again 2-3 years ago. It's still very much a seller's market though, so it might be a tool that you want to employ still. So, any questions? Then thanks for all the good questions, Matt.
I try.
Okay. All right. So Ashley's going to go over the Addendum A next week. And yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in the Addendum A that we like. A lot of protections for your buyers and a lot of cover your ass language for us. So it's good.
And the Addendum A also has to do with the I currently have a buyer that is going to be doing a VA mortgage, so that's in there too, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
And that one, you know, I said the Addendum AC is optional. The Addendum A, I mean, it's technically optional, but we want everyone to be using the Addendum A. And that's, again, whether or not you're going to be using any of the provisions that you can use in the Addendum A, there's still a lot of buried language, crash printed language that we just need our buyers to have. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.